Welcome. You're watching the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar, and it's time to talk about the floods. Over the last month, at least 200 people across 5 states have lost their lives due to excessive rainfall causing floods. Lakhs, meanwhile, have been displaced across the country. There are reports of heavy flooding and landslides from several states, and disaster management services have been pressed into action. But there is a bigger question. Just in the course of 2019, we've seen a deadly heat wave in north and central India, devastating floods in Bihar and Assam, torrential rains in Mumbai, and the worst drought in 70 years in Chennai. So what exactly are we seeing? Is this the impact of climate change? Are we in the middle of a climate crisis? To speak on this, I am joined this evening by Sunita Narayan, Director at the Center for Science and Environment. I'm also speaking with E. Somanathan, Professor, Economics and Planet Unit at the Indian Statistical Institute. I'm also joined by Anna Isaac, Deputy News Editor at the News Minute, a journalist who's been tracking the disaster as it unfolds from the ground. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for speaking with us. Ms. Narayan, let me begin by asking you the very basic question I started the show with. Would it be presumptuous in any manner at this point to say that what we're seeing in terms of these extreme climatic instances is basically climate change? It's here, the crisis is here.
No, definitely we can say that the extreme rain events that we are seeing today, and there is now more and more evidence, each year we are seeing more of such extreme rain events, which basically means massive amounts of rainfall in small amount of time. So more rain, less time, that we are seeing. But what we have to remember at all times is that even as we are seeing climate change, we cannot blame the flooding and the devastation that we are seeing only to climate change, because there is a massive amount of mismanagement that we are doing to our own land and water resources. We are not managing our drainage systems, we are not building for floods, and at a time when we are even more highly risked because of climate change, it's definitely leading to the devastation that we are seeing on the ground. So yes, we are seeing the beginnings of climate change as it is playing out, but this is combined with our own mismanagement of land and water, which is exacerbating the situation.
Absolutely, and that of course is in the context of the floods that we've been seeing over the last month. But you know, some of the instances or incidents we've seen, and I've talked about them in the beginning of the show, but heat waves, droughts, cyclones, and what we see later when we go out to undergo our disaster management activities or relief, then we see the impact of man-made problems. But are all of these linked to more erratic climate patterns and weather changes?
Yes, definitely. I mean, what you are seeing today, what scientists had predicted would happen because of climate change was weird weather. And that's what you're seeing, more erratic weather, more intensification of tropical cyclones, more weird weather, which means more cold, more heat. You just saw what's happened in Europe, where they've had such intense heat waves in Europe. You know what's happening in Australia, what's happening in large parts of the US. So yes, the world is today seeing what scientists had predicted would happen as what we call climate change. That is happening. There is no doubt today that climate change is playing out in front of our eyes today.
Let me bring Mr. E. Somanathan into the conversation. Mr. Somanathan, what is your take of what we're seeing? Of course, this is a mix of climate change and policy over decades, which has maybe made it worse, as Sunita Narayan explained. But this time round, such heavy rainfall in such a short span of time, when just a month before that we were looking at maybe a monsoon coming in with lag.
Yes, Sunita is completely right. She's characterized the situation absolutely correctly. We have always had flooding. We have always had damages from flooding. But what's happening now is that these floods are getting more intense, and we have also, our management at the same time is getting worse, if anything, in the sense that we are building more and more in an uncontrolled and unplanned way, and we are not building the appropriate infrastructure. We should actually be getting our act together and improving our planning, regulating building, informing people about flood risks and flood hazards, because these things are going to get worse. Climate change has begun, but it's going to get a lot worse. So we're going to have more extreme rain events, and therefore we're going to have more flooding. We should be prepared for that, and we should make the necessary planning and investments.
Okay, so landslides on one end, on the other hand, like in Karnataka and in Maharashtra, you have reports of saying there's poor dam management, of actually managing when the water is let out of the dams. Mr. Somanathan, can you shed some light on that? That why are we seeing all of these sort of erratic events taking place? And can nothing really be done to reduce the amount of death and destruction that follows?
No, certainly a great deal can be done. As I said, I think that there are basically two levels on which to look at this. I think the first level and the easiest one to do would be to have much better information and public warning systems. So right now, unfortunately, the data on flood risk, flood mapping, these things should be published by the government on the internet, so that anyone can look up where they're proposing to rent a house, where they're proposing to rent an office or build a factory, what is the flood risk in that place. So that will warn people ahead of time, right? Now, even better would be to have good urban planning so that, you prohibit construction in high flood risk areas. But unfortunately, I think that the second part of it, which is good urban planning, is something that we have failed at in India, and that has to do with our political system, our land mafias, and so on. It's a harder problem to fix. But I think public information is something that is fairly easy to do, and it needs to be done. We need to, put rainfall data on the web in real time. I think the IMD should be obliged and obligated to do much more than it has done. Now, of course, they will say that, we need time to validate the data, this, that, and the other. All that is true, but then that is always done as a matter of course. All our economic statistics, we first have advanced estimates, quick estimates, provisional estimates, and then finally we get the final numbers. So people cannot wait for things like floods. So those early warning systems really need to be put in place.
So you think it's a problem of early warning systems, and even if there are, would that really help? Yes, Ms. Narayan.
Tamanna, I want to come back to the issue of dams, because I think that's a very important issue that has played a role in last year's floods and in this year's floods, last year in Kerala and this year in Karnataka and Maharashtra. And I think it's very, this is the sign of the change that we need in the future. The fact is, dams were always seen as a way to modulate the floods in the past. So you actually built dams to say, I will store the water and this will help me to modulate the floods and also provide water during the drought period that would happen. And that was the basic reason for dams, and they served a purpose. The fact is, today, in an age of such variable and extreme rain events, the dams itself are becoming a cause of the flooding and the crisis. If you look at Kerala last year, and this is part of the variability of the rainfall, Kerala was actually going through a very bad drought, and therefore the dam managers very correctly were storing all the water in the 50 odd dams in the Kerala highlands because they knew they needed to keep the water for the entire period to generate electricity. Now comes this extreme rain, and that means that their dams are already full of water. There is more water. They would burst, and the dam gates are opened, and the flood becomes a deluge. That's the same thing that is happening in Maharashtra or in Karnataka today. our ability to be able to manage the dam water in an age of such variable and extreme rain. And this is where Som's point on forecasting becomes critical. Today, we do not have the forecasting abilities to be able to tell dam managers, listen, you will get extreme rain in the next few months, hold on. There is none. In fact, what we had information, and this is the nature of the information today, and our inability technically, I think IMD is doing a great job. I think today they are now focusing on these issues, but there are limitations. They don't have the ability to be able to say all of June there was deficiency.
Yeah.
Now suddenly we have a surplus. This is the nature of the extreme rains that we have to work on. That's what we have to work towards in our future planning.
So one part of it is forecasting extreme weather with as much accuracy as possible, so that you can take some measures in advance. The other is responding to a situation like this. And I want to come back to you. Hopefully that line is much better. What are your observations on the way that we have managed to deal with the situations as they arrive? The usual go-to, of course, is paramilitary forces are pressed in, the army pitches in when it's needed. We technically do have a national, disaster management apparatus in place. But what is its efficacy on the ground?
Well, I mean, we are responding to these disasters, but the point is that we're not learning any lessons from them. Chennai 2015, Kerala 2018, Kodagu 2018, again, Karnataka, Kerala, Maharashtra this time around. We're not learning any lessons from the disasters that have been unfolding for the last few years. And I mean, why should we be reacting? Why should NDRF and the army be responding to these events? Why are we not preventing these disasters? I just wanted to come back to the dam management point that Sunita actually had pointed out. In Karnataka, we've just put out a report that by August of first week, most of the dams were 90% full. Because dam officials were telling us that, listen, we're preparing for a drought in the future. We're not preparing for a flood, and this despite IMD, going out and giving red warnings and red alerts, saying, listen, we're going to see heavy rainfall in this area. But officials on the ground, the dam officials, the water resource department in Karnataka is still preparing for a drought. And this is, we need to put disaster management, which is presently on paper, into practice now. We should be preparing both for a flood and for a drought.
The question is, can we do that at the same time? And let's go back to causation. The root cause of some of the issues that we are seeing, and Sunita pointed out to them earlier. Sunita, I know you want to add on to what Anna is saying, but I just want to quickly, because I think this is an important aspect of the whole discussion that I don't want to miss out on. We're talking about rampant development and construction over decades. And then now you have policymakers looking at maybe increasing the pace of this development, which is a need of an economy like ours. Do you think that the awareness right now exists of how dire the situation is, and that there is actually a thought process in place that what are we going to do about these drought and then flash flood and the human life and destruction that is lost? How does it work into, say, environmental clearances and other such matters of policy? Sunita?
Tamanna, I think it's a very, very important question you've asked. I don't think we are understanding the nature and the seriousness of the problem. See, the government of India today has launched, I think, a very ambitious Jal Shakti program. What is the Jal Shakti program? It's about water conservation. What do we mean by water conservation? Making sure you capture rain when and where it falls. What does that mean? It means making sure that you can protect every ditch, every drain, every pond, every tank. You protect them, you manage them, you make sure that you are obsessed about drainage more than you're obsessed about just development. That's what water conservation means. Now, that is essential in a climate risk India. The fact is today, and this is what worries me enormously, we are actually having drought at the time of flood and flood at the time of drought. When it down to earth, we used to report, we used to always have a drought cover, and then a month when we would have a gap, and then you would have flood cover. Today, you move from drought to flood, and if you look at the map of India, you actually have a map of India where large parts of India are still in drought. Even in Maharashtra, there is still drought at the time when you are having such terrible floods. Our ability to be able to manage that water is critical. If we don't understand that, then development, and what we mean by development, means nothing.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Because if you cannot secure any kind of development from nature's vagaries, it's going to be a problematic. Mr. Somanathan, you want to come in on that point, because increasingly perhaps we are seeing this cycle, and a microcosm in a city like Mumbai, where you see water shortage, then you see very heavy rainfall in a few days, and the city comes to a standstill. And we usually, media goes about asking authorities, what have you done about it, why is the city such a mess, etc., etc. But this seems to be a larger problem in various parts of the country. Mr. Somanathan.
Yes, the larger problem is exactly because the extremes are getting worse. So we are getting all our rainfall concentrated in just a few days and in just a few places. So the result is some places are suffering from drought and other places are having floods, and you can move from drought to flood extremely quickly because you get no rain for a long time and then suddenly it all comes down all at once. So, and this is a characteristic of climate change. It's been well predicted, it's been modeled, and people know that this is a consequence of climate change. And I really want to emphasize that we're just at the beginning of climate change. The climate has started to change, and it's going to change more, and it's going to get worse because carbon concentrations are increasing in the atmosphere. So the temperatures are going to rise and the climate system is going to get more extreme. So we really need to plan for this. Unfortunately, as I said, our political system is terrible at regulation because politicians can make a huge amount of money by giving building permits. So they really don't want to stop building anywhere because then they make less money. So this is a chronic problem. Now, it's a problem that we should try to fix, and we should all campaign to fix it. But I think it's going to be very difficult because it goes to the absolute core of our political system. Easier thing to do right now, which will help, it will not be a full solution, but it will help, is to publish the information on hydrology, on river flows, on dam levels, on rainfall, and to do all this in real time, make it available on the web, make it high resolution that anybody at any point can look up where they are and see what is the risk of being flooded. So I think that informational thing is something the government of India can take the lead.
Yeah.
We have the infrastructure, we have the scientists, we have the IMD. It's a matter of the will.
No, absolutely. And the focus on this. Right now, the questions that we should be asking, even as we, cover all of the excessive floods, the loss of life and property, the relief management, is that are those that need to are they sitting up and taking notice of what's going on? Just an interesting sort of alarming, point that the World Bank has made, that India could lose 2.8% of its GDP by 2050 just because of climate change. Are we adding this in our calculations? And I want to come to you on this point about awareness on the parts of governments. And this is one of those things which, state governments, local authorities really come into place. It seems like we're always caught grappling with an event after it has occurred.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that the government is not aware. Take Kerala's example, for now. There was the Gadgil report which came out in 2011, 2012. It was a report on the Western Ghats, essentially saying that, listen, you should not be building stuff here, you shouldn't be constructing these things over here. And they had mapped out the region saying that, there were eco-sensitive points, etc. What happened to that report? It was thrown out by the assembly. All of Karnataka's legislators at that point rejected the report, barring one legislator. And look at us now, like years on, we're still talking about the Gadgil report. Now, what do we have to do? We have to now go back to mapping all those vulnerable areas and ensure that those people living over there perhaps move out. They will be displaced, but we will have to ensure that this doesn't repeat. If there is a landslide or flood next year, we're not bringing down the same people once again. And we need to go back to, the Gadgil report. We need to go back to planning for these disasters once again.
I want to wrap up this discussion with some idea of a way forward. So let me come to Sunita first. If you had to give sort of a 3-point program or an agenda to say the central government right now to sit up and take notice. First, we have to have an official stance saying that this is an impact of climatic change. And then what next?
Well, I will reword that, because I don't want governments to blame what is happening today only on climate change, and that's something important, because I am worried about what I read sometimes when chief ministers just say, oh, there is such bad flood in my area and this is climate change, which basically means it's an act of God. I can do nothing about it. I don't want that to happen, because we must always say, yes, climate change, we are highly at risk. It will only get worse, as Som has very correctly said, but we are mismanaging our own land and water resources, our forest resources. We do not care about our water bodies. We do not care about our drainage. We do not plan purposefully about drought management, about mitigating the dangers of floods, and so it will get only worse. I think that's the messaging that I would like to make sure that we give out, because otherwise what I see in a country which is so fatalistic in any case, and we love to point fingers at something else, climate change will become just that bogey to say, what can I do? It's climate change.
Exactly. Let's
and
not blame it on the weather.
That's something we should be very careful about.
Yeah, no, absolutely crucial point. You want to add to that, Mr. Somanathan?
Only.
Yes, I think that, as I said, I think it's really important that the government come out with a program so that anyone, anywhere in the country can say, right here in this place I'm sitting in now, how many floods have there been? When were the last floods? What is the flood risk? They should come out with that. They should come out with a model in which every citizen can ask that question about their own location and easily look it up. Then citizens will put pressure on local bodies and on states to do something about that flood risk. So I think that's something the central government can do. They have the capability, and we have the science and technological capability to do that. We should certainly do it.
Yes, you've reiterated that point a couple of times in this discussion. But even if the average citizen has that information, what are they going to do with it? It's really not an option for many to up and leave where they live. Or to move cities or states, or to move their location. So I just want to understand a little more, because since you've insisted that is a very important part of the whole solution, what will an average Indian do with that information?
I think actually that a lot of people can move, and maybe I will not be able to move this year, and maybe not even next year. But maybe in 2 or 3 years I can move, and I don't have to move very far typically. There'll typically be a place within 1 or 2 kilometers of where I am where there's no flood risk, just because flood risk is extremely highly localized. So all I need to know is that actually this particular place is very vulnerable. If I just move a few meters higher, I'll be all right. So that's the kind of information that if people have, they will avoid those risks. So I think that's something that is quite important. Let me just add very quickly that Government of India, the other thing that Government of India really needs to do is it has to be more proactive on the international scene in reducing emissions. Government of India needs to engage with other large emitting countries and say that if you reduce emissions by so much, we will also do that. So far, I think in international negotiations, India has been more reactive. I think we need to be more proactive, because it is coming home to us and it is going to get worse.
Absolutely. India's stated position, of course, is one of cooperation on the world stage, but we need to move forward much faster. I want to thank all of you for joining us on this very crucial discussion today on the India development debate. We'll take a very short break, but we're coming right back after this to talk a bit about politics. Now, over the weekend, the Congress got a new formula, which is an old one. Sonia Gandhi is leading the Congress party once again, but as an interim chief. Can she save the party once more? We're coming back with that conversation. Don't go away.